All right. So this is an interesting time of the year because as we're recording here, it's Thanksgiving is right around the corner, just a couple days away, actually. And we're going into what my friend Mike Jackness from the Ecom Crew podcast is referred to as the gauntlet, meaning you have all these cash flow scenarios of we put out all this money for inventory to get to this time of year for hopes of by January having some of that money back, but then you got to start reinvesting that into inventory to get through Chinese New Year. And then here, at least here in the US, Taxman starts coming by looking for money. So our good friend Uncle Sam is going to be asking for, which we should, of course, make sure we pay what we owe, just in full transparency. But I'm super excited to get into a cash flow conversation here with Jacob Schwartz from Payability. So Jacob, thanks for coming on Maximizing E-commerce.
Of course. Thank you, Kevin. Nice to see you again, and happy to be in front of the audience again.
Yeah, exactly. And, Payability, you guys were a sponsor of a couple of the virtual summits that I had hosted earlier this year, 2021. And it just became actually a more popular topic than I kind of even thought to talk about cash flow, because I think it's one of those things that when you get into business, you think in terms of profit and loss and margins, and that's all you think about. But then you learn very quickly when you're put in the fire of cash flow that it's not like you don't pay for things instantly and get paid back for them instantly. You're putting money up front for inventory. Now it seems like that just-in-time inventory has gone away. So you could be buying stuff 3-4 months down the road to get money back later on. So let's talk a little bit about who is Payability and what do you do there?
Of course, yeah. So Payability is one of the leading e-commerce funding platforms out there for delayed marketplace sellers and D2C brands that utilize Shopify. So the flagship product that Payability offers is called Instant Access. It allows any seller on a delayed payout marketplace, such as an Amazon, Walmart, Newegg, to accelerate those payouts. So as we're talking about cash flow and as you're talking about purchasing inventory and thinking about, oh, I'm not going to get paid. Well, right off the bat, you know that Amazon is not paying you for at least 14 days. And if you have some sort of reserve, it could be an extra 14 to 4 weeks to get that capital. So really what Payability does is turn that net 14 into a net 1. Allows you to get paid out the next day instead of having to wait that additional 2 weeks, so that you can alleviate these issues of cash flow, being able to reinvest back into the business for inventory, for marketing. Those are usually the two main sources. And then on the flip side, we offer an advanced product, which is essentially just an advance on future sales. So lump sum upfront capital into your bank account that can be used for any business related activities, and that's paid back through your e-commerce sales. And really what's unique about Payability is that we are marketplace agnostic. We will aggregate all of your sales across your platform. So if you are selling on Amazon, if you are selling on Shopify, if you are selling on Walmart, we can aggregate all of those platforms and say, hey, here's the holistic view. Here is, a seller who is doing 300K a month across all platforms and not so much 100K on one specific platform. So that is really what's unique to us is the ability to understand e-commerce sellers and understand that they have different needs and that they are looked at differently than, say, a traditional brick and mortar business. So that's what Payability is in a nutshell. And then my role here is I run business development, strategic partnerships. So what that means is being able to connect Payability to new marketplaces, right? We think about Amazon, we think about Walmart, we think about Newegg. What other marketplaces that folks are using that pay out on delayed terms and potentially need an accelerated payout product, or the ability to have an advanced product. So looking for larger strategic partnerships across marketplaces, tools within the Amazon space, any sort of analytics tool or repricing or any tool that Amazon sellers use, allow them to get access to capital within those tools and sort of streamline that process. And yeah, that's sort of the basis for my role here and what Payability does.
Yeah, exactly. I love the fact that you guys started off focusing more on the e-commerce companies, because one of the challenges a lot of e-commerce sellers find is, if you were to open a sandwich shop, you probably could go to your local bank and they understand that concept of a business. Whereas I think, traditional banks are understanding a little bit more and more, but like of the e-commerce world, but you kind of have to prove a little bit more to them
Yes.
to get any sort of funding.
Yeah.
So,
And it's sort of like as e-commerce had come onto the market, traditional lenders look at it like, oh, you don't have a physical store. We don't even want to look at a business
right.
like this. And that's really always been the model, is that, you go to your local branch, you go to Bank of America, and you try and present some sort of business plan, and you don't have a location. And that sort of just hinders you right off the bat. And that's always been the look, is that e-commerce has always been too tech forward and too forward in the future for traditional lending, which has always been about 20 to 30 years in the past.
Right. So that has created some holes for folks that, maybe are having issues getting traditional lending. And to your point, like a lot of the people I know who have relationships with traditional lending oftentimes have like warehouses, and they're well established, like, multiple years into the business and whatnot before traditional lending will really even take a look at them. So,
Correct.
so for folks who maybe traditional lending either is or is not an option, or they're just weighing out their different options, what are some of the let's just, for lack of a better term, non-traditional options that are out there in general?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of folks don't understand the scope of alternative lending, online lenders, what's out there. And it really comes into buckets, right? You have personal online lenders and alternative lenders, folks like a SoFi or a Prosper that do peer-to-peer lending for your personal side, and home equity line of credit. And these are great ways to finance on the personal side. And on the business side, you have a slew of options within sort of this short-term space where a lot of these folks, they're only requiring somewhere around 1 year in business, about 10K in monthly sales is sort of the rule of thumb for any sort of outside of traditional lenders. So you have folks like, On Deck, Bluevine, Cabbage have been around for forever, for the past 10 to 15 years, helping brick and mortar lenders. And now folks like Payability have emerged on the spot to essentially take this model and recreate it for e-commerce businesses and say, hey, we're specifically designed for e-commerce. And that's really the what it comes down to. And then there's, competitors within our space who do similar things. So there are a slew of lenders. I'd say in the alternative space, it's relatively short term, right? Outside of SBA financing, outside of bank lending, you're usually looking at, say, a 12-month financing option. And that's sort of rule of thumb as well.
Got it. So in essence, financing the next 12 months of working capital, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and it's more so, right, where if you can't prove profitability for your business, if you can't show exactly like you were saying, 2 years of tax returns, the alternative way is looking at cash flow for the business, looking at 3 months of bank statements or 3 months of transaction history. So if you're going to a provider like Payability, if you're going to another source, say an alternative lender, they're only going to want to see the last 90 days of history. And that's usually the most important part for them, is what is the scope or snapshot of this business over the last 90 days? Has it been positive? Has it been negative? And what do sort of those trends look like to produce an offer? And what usually happens is you're going to get approved or declined usually within about a 24-hour period for something short term, usually in that 6 to 12-month option. But these offers are designed for inventory and market it. And that's really the purpose of, can we provide financing for the necessary tools that sellers and business owners need without having to take on a 5 to 10 to 30-year term loan, which are usually meant for acquisitions, property, investments where you don't see return for 6, 5 years, something like that. Whereas inventory marketing for e-commerce sellers, if you do sell at a high velocity and you are flipping within a 30 to 90-day period, it makes sense, right? For these shorter term options to say, hey, I don't need a 10-year term loan. I don't need a 2-year term loan. I only need 6 months because I know that my cost of capital is only, say, $2,000 on $10,000 advance, or a loan, and know I'm going to make $20,000 to $30,000 in additional revenue, and know that that sort of outweighs the cost. And that's generally what we see with our clients, and what I've seen across the board in small business lending is that these folks will take these offers just because they know they will see the return on it.
Yeah. So that's really what this is coming down to is, if you're able to, put dollars in and get dollars back, this is giving you, like, if you put $1 in and get $2 out, you want to repeat that all day long. And so if you have the opportunity to put in, $2 and get $4 back, then
Exactly.
you don't want to run out because you only have $1 in my oversimplification there.
Of course. No, and you're exactly right. It's will my return outweigh that cost of capital? And really what we're now seeing is this transformation, right, from a world that was stuck sort of in the APR world, where everyone's evaluating long 30-year mortgages and saying, oh, I want this 8 to 10% APR, when you realize that you could be paying 50% simple interest over that period, and say on that $200,000 mortgage, you're ended up paying $300,000 back. Where, as if you can see a return on a business loan in a quicker amount of time, APRs will be a lot higher. Mm-hmm. But generally, it comes down to what you can do with that capital over say traditional APRs, which are meant for longer term options. So we always see a combat, right, on APR, which is more of a traditional term, and then we always combat that with cost of capital over return for your business. And especially during these times for e-commerce sellers, we see folks come around in September, October, and say, hey, I need the cash flow. I need the funds for this specific time period, as they have 5 to 8 holidays lined up. And they know they're going to make, X amount of dollars on this offer. So they know that the opportunity will outweigh that cost.
Yeah, exactly. And for folks who aren't familiar with the cycle, and those who are can relate to this, that you get to this time of year and you're really starting to look at ordering, because you want stuff to get on a boat before early February. Really, you want it to be leaving the factory in mid-January, so you don't miss the boat when all of a sudden everybody in China leaves and goes home for a month. Like, if you're not familiar with this, they're gone. And so you got to start making your orders now if you want them to be. And my suppliers, like, hey, with all the challenges we've had lately, with labor and the supply chain issues and everything else, like, just as everyone here is having supply chain issues, so is your factories. You got to start ordering now. And so if you have the capital for your growth and everything else, great. If you don't, then maybe these are things to think about. And so what would be some ways someone might, like, on a spreadsheet, and I know we're having a verbal discussion, so it's harder to visualize this, but how would someone justify this, of why it's worth the cost to do this, so to speak?
Yeah, and it really comes down to either analyzing if it's a specific marketing campaign, if it's an inventory purchase that you're looking at, and you can say, hey, I can get the inventory in this amount of time. It takes me 60 days to flip this inventory, and I'm expecting, say, 100K in revenue. And now if you're taking on whatever it is, a 50K loan or 50K advance or something like that to fund this purchase, and realize my cost of capital might be $5,000 to $10,000 on that. And so what you're saying is, I expect 100K in revenue for an additional, 5 to 10K on whatever this is, a 50K advance or a loan, or if it's a payout product like Payabilities, and really just deciphering how much you're going to make from a top line basis compared to that cost, and then from a bottom line basis, right, factor in all of your expenses to make sure that you're profitable. And hopefully that's something that you're always on top of, is what expenses look like, and what does bottom line look like, and that should always be sort of home for you.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't have a bookkeeper, I have an episode where I interviewed my bookkeepers. I definitely recommend you go get a bookkeeper, whether it's the same ones I use or someone else, because this is one of those things you got to stay on top of the numbers. And it goes back to, you don't understand the cash flow situation until you're in it. And just to kind of put it this way, a lot of people have had stuff stuck at the ports. I mean, I know people that had stuff that left in March and they didn't get it until October. And, that's not a 7-month trip to go across,
Yes.
even in a rowboat. It's not a 7-month trip across the Pacific. It should be about a 2-week trip, and then maybe, a few days here and there. So add on a couple more weeks for, leaving the port in China and getting through customs and on a truck or whatever. But there's all these delays in LA. So I know some people have looked at like going to Miami. Well,
Yes.
Miami, now you're talking about a 45-day instead of a 2-week trip, because they got to go through the Suez, or not Suez, the Panama Canal. So maybe you still end up getting your stuff sooner than you would going through LA, depending on your situation. But now you're adding an extra month to what the trip would have been before, and maybe you're also ordering more to give yourself another 30 to 60 days of inventory in stock.
Yes.
So now you're really netting 30 days more on the boat, 30, 60 days in the warehouse. So now you're adding on 90 days worth of inventory, and there's a cost to that. And that's money sitting on a shelf. And if you have it in your bank, great. And if you don't, then you have to start looking into some of these other options.
Exactly. Yeah. And with shipping costs, the way things have been, margins are slipping, right? And we see it across the board, is that sales velocity and just the ability to sell at the way that folks were selling early 2020, right in the midst of the pandemic. It's just you're not able to support that, depending on what you're selling and who your suppliers look like. Across the board, folks are dealing with one issue one way or another, and that's really it. If it's shipping costs, if it's supply chain, and the folks that are getting scrappy are the ones that are winning, right? The ones who are finding manufacturing in North America or the US or air shipping, just to combat some of these ways. Those are the folks who are winning to continue to sell at velocity. But it's more of if you sort of sit there and put your head in your hands and say, well, this is just the way things are, then it's going to be tough to support the velocity, and especially during this time, to support the competition that comes during these holidays.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of variables involved with this, with the holidays, the post holidays, Chinese New Year, tax time comes up here pretty quick, which for some folks, it's not just an Uncle Sam thing. It's also a state tax. I lucky enough to live in Florida where there is no state income tax, but there's also state income tax and we're not here to provide tax advice. So go talk to your CPA if you don't have one. As soon as you get into business, you got to upgrade to getting a CPA instead of TurboTax, is my personal opinion. But just to help people make that decision, like you've got Payability, as you were explaining earlier, is kind of like two main products you're known for. The daily payouts, which instead of 14 days, you're waiting in that cycle, you're getting paid basically the next day.
Correct.
And then you've got capital advance, which kind of acts like a loan. So let's first talk about both of them and who would be the right candidates. So and what is the advantages of one over the other, depending on what someone's situation is. So let's start with the daily.
Yeah. So the daily product, the daily payout product, really is a cash flow tool, right? Meant for folks. If you don't have, a complete need for capital, more meant just to avoid unexpected expenses, right? The ability to have capital at hand and know that you don't have to wait. And more so, the cash flow cycle for e-commerce sellers, Amazon sellers, it's constantly negative, right? Money is constantly going out, and then it's coming back in, and you're really sort of at that, up and down phase. And it really just allows sellers to have the ability to have cash on hand, knowing that they can replenish if they need to. They can, run a marketing campaign if they need to up whatever it is, and knowing that you have that capital on hand. And then other folks, come around in Q4, because it does help from that perspective over, say, taking out an Amazon lending loan or a 1 to 2 year term loan and saying, hey, my cost of capital is going to be XYZ on this 1 year term loan. Yes, it's going to give me the capital I need, but if I can get the most out of my sales on a daily basis to help me during this busy time, then that might make sense. As we have folks that come around in September and October, and they leave in January or February as happy customers, because they're able to alleviate those cash flow needs for every single sort of for holiday up until the Chinese New Year and say, oh, we did good. We executed on the time frame that we needed, and we avoided sort of that cost of capital by taking on a cash flow tool like Payability. And then on the flip side, the advance is really meant to say, hey, I need 50K to put into this investment right now, and I know that I can make XYZ within a 6-month time frame. So if it's inventory, marketing, whatever the purpose is, and knowing that I can flip this inventory and see a return in this 6-month time frame, or if I have a 5x ROAS or ACOS, and know that you can see that return in that time period, it makes sense, and that's really the purpose. So one is more cash flow related, alleviate the negative cash flow, and then the other is more targeted investment, and that's really how we see it.
Got it. So I could see someone who, to your point, like, if they're starting to get to that cash flow crunch of this time of year where you're waiting on kind of that, it kind of becomes depending on when someone's cycles are, it might be that mid-December one, they really start seeing some of the bigger bucks coming in.
Exactly.
And they've already got an order that's ready to leave China, and their freight forwarder saying we need payment now, or, their supplier saying we need payment now, or I could definitely see that for someone that's in wholesale and retail arbitrage who's got a quicker cycle of, being especially beneficial. But just in general, like to your point, like people might come to you in September, October, and then leave in January, February. That might be a beneficial thing too. So,
and if you have a reserve balance, right, is if you have this reserve, we are advancing on the reserve, and those folks that need their capital now, and if you have 30% of your sales in reserve, you're waiting at least a month for that. So it's a difficult time to be in that.
Oh yeah. So, and I forget that one sometimes because I have one of the older accounts.
Yes.
Where I don't have the reserve, at least in the US. I do in Europe. So I forget that sometimes people do have. It's not just the 14-day cycle. It's also
it's 28.
We're gonna hold some of that back. Oh, and I've also noticed this time of year, I end up with a lot more, and I've seen it with other people too, where you end up with more B2B customers that are on invoices, and those seem to take longer to pay out because at least for me, I have a lot of giftable things, and somebody makes a big order and they're buying Christmas gifts for the office, and they decide, whatever Amazon gives them net 30 terms or whatever. And so when they get around to it is when I get paid. So Amazon doesn't pay me for that order until I get paid. So that's another challenge with all of this. Okay. So really what it comes down to is figuring out what is your cost of capital versus what is the right situation. So, for someone, and it might not be the right thing, or maybe another option is the right thing, but what would they do to start exploring those options?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? It's and I hear this a lot is, you're sort of in this situation, and who do you turn to? Usually the first thing is people here, friends, family. I know someone who took out a solution, and that's usually the go-to, right? Is that you want to go to someone you trust. And generally, what my role here is in the partnership side is that we see such a high conversion on deals that come from partners, is that you want to go to the folks that you trust, right? So if you have a PPC software that you use, if you're using like a Quartile or someone else, or if you're using an analytics tool or a Feedvisor for repricing, you want to go, hey, do you have any recommendations for folks in this space? And I think that's always a good go-to, right? Go to the folks that you trust first to see if there are any recommendations. And lo and behold, they have partners like a Payability, or they want to recommend the right solution. So I'd say Google is usually not the best option. I'd say you're going to go onto Google and you're going to type in lending or funding. And you have folks that are battling it out from a sponsored ad placement to say, hey, we are the best solution for you. And you go and say, oh, it was the first option on Google, so it's probably the way to go.
It just means they were the best at SEO, or they spent a lot of money.
Yes, and it's usually the latter, right? They're spending a ton of money to be that first placement, to bid on that keyword for lending or Amazon lending or loan or whatever the keyword that they are looking for. And it usually just equates to a bad experience, right? Is that you're sort of being deceived by what's out there. And I implore everyone to look at options, compare what options look like, right? Is that if you are going to use Google, don't just look at option 1, but look at option 1 through 4 and say, hey, I've looked at 4 or 5 of these, and this is what it looks like. And I'd say always compare term length to dollar amount to cost of capital, right? If you're taking $50,000 out over a 6-month, a 12-month, 18-month period, you want to know how much you're paying back, and then what those payments look like either on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to say, hey, I can support this from a cash flow basis, and it will give me the necessary capital that I need. And then you don't want to get yourself in a situation of taking on way too much cost of capital and saying, you know what, just because it's the longest term, just because it's an 18-month or a 24-month option, you know what, it has to be the best option for me, because then you end up really eating into your margins and saying, hey, I didn't need to pay this much money for this opportunity. And I really could have taken out a shorter opportunity and saved X amount on that. So compare term lengths, compare cost of capital. That's really my best option. And then always explore at least a handful of them to, one, leverage offers against other lenders, other providers, see if you can sort of squeeze the most out of them. And B, just don't sell yourself short based on what's out there. But yeah, recommendations I think will always be key from the people that you trust.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. And I love the fact you also said that don't just basically take the money just to have money in your bank account, because there is a cost to it. So
Yes.
make sure that this is something that's targeted, that's going to get you a return. Like you actually need inventory, not, oh, I can use this as a down payment to buy a new car.
Yes.
This is, maybe you can ultimately, on the profit you make on the inventory you buy, you can go buy the down payment on the car. But for now, we're focusing on, we need to have a targeted need for our cash flow and not just a nice to have.
Exactly.
Because you don't want to get yourself into trouble where all of a sudden your margin's gone because you weren't watching it. So it's all about not watching your numbers and things like that. So and I know if folks want to get Payability as an option, they can go to maximizingecommerce.com/payability, which, correct me if I'm wrong, it's spelled pay like if you're paying for something, and then ability, like if you have the ability or not ability to do something.
Exactly.
So, and then I believe there was an offer that was included with that.
Correct. Yeah. So anyone who signs up through the referral link will get a $250 sign-up bonus to become a Payability customer. So as a partner of Maximizing E-commerce, we want to make sure that folks get the most of this offer and this deal. So if you do sign up, we will essentially give you a refund, a rebate into your Payability wallet of $250 the week after you sign up.
Wow, that's awesome. I appreciate you doing that. And in full disclosure, like I mentioned at the top of the show, Payability has been a sponsor of several of the events that I've hosted. And I don't just take on anybody as a sponsor. It's because I've had a long-term relationship with Payability through a lot of the events that I've worked on, and I've just known their reputation for a long time. So if this is something that's worth exploring for you, check out. Again, we'll have the link in the description down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening to the audio version, this will be in the show notes. But do your homework. I'm not saying that this is for you or not for you. And if you think this is something to explore it. Is really what it comes down to. We're not trying to push anyone to do anything, but if it is something that could be beneficial for you so that you don't miss out on an opportunity because you didn't have the funds to buy inventory, and then you missed waiting for after Chinese New Year, and then now we're talking about something that ships out in May. That might be the type of thing you really want to look at. So definitely, you use your best judgment, and ultimately, as the business owner, no one knows your business like you do. And like Jacob said, explore your options. Don't just Google one thing and click on the first ad, think that was the right thing. So any other closing advice here, Jacob?
No, just wishing everyone luck in this busy time as we now hit some of these main holidays, and this will be coming out around Thanksgiving time. So wishing everyone a happy holiday, and hope to see you in the Payability front lines.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jacob.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it, and have a great day.